Shields down. Impact in 3. The voice cracked across Earth's defense command. Calm as a drawn blade, Commander Dax Varen locked eyes with the laser plasma display as incoming trajectories sliced across it, red veins bleeding into blue continents. No alarms wailed. No final warnings. Just the cold, biting knowledge of what was about to happen. Outside, the first strike split the dawn. From orbit, a Zorvane railgun slug hurtled down, cleaving the Atlantic skyline like a god's hammer. The air collapsed under the force, folding sound into a dense roar that flattened skyscrapers and peeled streets like paper. Glass erupted from buildings in glinting sheets. Towers bent, screeched, and folded in on themselves, coughing smoke into a sky already stained copper by the burning atmosphere. Inside the command bunker, the lights flickered once, not from damage, but from Earth's quiet acknowledgement that the war had truly begun. Sector 8 gone. Dorn Salvek reported, his knuckles bone-white against the edge of his console. The heads-up displays shivered with impact alerts, zones blinking into silence one after another. Atlantic Command, Pacific Watch, North Continental Defense. Names vanished under the Zorvane onslaught. Dax stood immovable. His breath, dry and metallic in the recycled air, scraped his throat. Around him, officers moved like stunned marionettes, reaching for protocols they had only whispered about during drills. Another slug hit. Earth buckled again. The world above them, he knew, was unraveling, city by city, coast by coast. No retaliation, Dax said, voice low enough to force silence across the room. No launches. Hold. The officers hesitated, glancing at one another. The instinct to strike back boiled under their skin, but Dax's presence pulled it taut. The urge to retaliate would waste what little advantage they had left. They had to endure. The floor quivered as another distant city folded into ash. The tang of heated stone and burning plastic seeped down into the bunker, scratching the nose like old ashes. Somewhere overhead, the earth groaned, a slow, wounded sound that felt too much like a living thing dying. He moved to the command lectern. His boots clicked sharply across the metal deck, the sound crisp in the stillness. The air carried a strange, bitter sharpness, the taste of Earth's old arrogance crumbling. Pull up Solace protocol, Dax ordered. Malric Dorn keyed the command into his station. A new display bloomed in front of them, an iron map of Earth's true defenses, alliances, networks, economic nooses braided tight across galactic systems. No missiles, no fleets, only strategy woven over generations. Another impact trembled through the ground. The lights dimmed, then steadied. They're not here to bargain, Dorn muttered, almost to himself. His words hung like smoke. Dax let the weight of the devastation settle over the room. Outside, humanity screamed. Cities crumbled into dust. The railguns carved deep scars across oceans and continents alike. Above them, the Zorvane fleet remained out of sight, invisible save for the ruination they rained down. But Dax didn't look up. He didn't need to. They think this is conquest, Dax said at last, his voice carrying without needing to rise. Let them believe it. On the displays, systems blinked online, pre-signed treaties, old handshakes bound in ancient ink and quiet understanding. Treaties crafted when Earth had first seen the stars and understood what would one day come clawing at them. Jaren Vorskinage flickered onto the side feed. His face, usually lined with weary calculation, was bloodless. Confirming orbital satellite sweep, Jaren said. They're holding position. No troop deployment. Pure orbital devastation pattern. Dax nodded once. If the Zorvane wanted humanity to break under fire, they would find only silence staring back. Another strike fell, distant but no less brutal. Somewhere, an entire coastline surrendered to the void. Dax watched the wreckage unfold through the feeds, cities folding like discarded flags, oceans churning from impacts, fires climbing high enough to blacken daylight. His senses strained against the stale air and muffled sounds. Even underground, the Earth's agony seeped into the bones, the taste of crumbling concrete settling on the tongue like dust. At his side, Orin Fassel leaned in, voice steady. We move now. Dax considered the raw destruction outside. Rage simmered at the edge of thought, but he pressed it down. Rage was simple. Fury was predictable. Their answer had to be neither. He turned to Orin. Not with weapons, he said. With everything else. A beat passed. Then Orin's mouth quirked. Not a smile, but something colder. Approval. Malric shifted, his shoulder brushing the console as he stiffened. We'll need a signature from you to trigger Directive Solace. Dax pressed his hand onto the reader. A muted beep acknowledged what Earth had kept secret for decades. The readiness to strike not with guns, but with law, economy, information, the new artillery of survival. A low-frequency tremor rolled through the bunker. Dust sifted from the ceiling. On the displays, Earth cities blinked out like dying stars. The bunker fell into a hard, brittle silence. Finally, Dax spoke, each word a stone dropped into the stillness. "Let the galaxy watch," he said. "Let them see how we bury empires." A final impact, deeper, slower, rippled through the ground. Somewhere above, humanity's old world crumbled. Dax Veron stood, hands behind his back, unshaken amid the dying. The Jorvain had expected humanity to scream. They would soon learn the power of humanity, when it simply did not yield. "Seal the bunker," Dax Veron said. Voice dry as winter ash, heavy doors rumbled shut, locking the survivors into a steel womb buried deep beneath broken ground. Overhead, the world cracked open in flame and ruin. But down here, Earth's real counterstrike was already stirring. The laser plasma displays hummed to life, throwing sharp blue light across Dax's face. No hint of urgency betrayed him. He stepped toward the center dais, the sleeves of his uniform whispering against his sides. Orin Fassel was already moving. His fingers danced over the command panels, summoning rows of forgotten treaties, dormant contracts, ancient handshakes resurrected into lethal weapons. Each agreement flickered onto the displays, stamped with the old seals of worlds that had once called Earth irrelevant. Jaren Forsey's lean figure materialized through the side entrance, his eyes catching Dax's. No words passed between them. None were needed. Jaren dipped his head once, a silent acknowledgement that the intelligence feeds were locked, encrypted, invisible to any prying Jorvain eyes. "All alliances intact," Orin announced, voice clipped, devoid of celebration. The backbones held. Dax nodded, stepping closer. The sharp scent of ionized air from the display units cut into the bunker's recycled coldness. It smelled of old storms and static promises. He reached for the console. His hand hovered for a breath, then settled flat against the activation plate. The screen bloomed red once, then melted into gold, illuminating his features like a man judging the future itself. "Directive Solace," he said, letting the name fall into the bunker like a stone dropped into deep water. "Approved." Across the galaxy, silent currents shifted. Treaties awoke. Embargo clauses sparked into life. Trade guilds double-checked old compacts and found themselves bound to act. Governors on distant moons opened black folders they were told never to touch unless Earth fell. Malric Dorn watched the changes unfold across the display wall, his mouth a hard line. "First ripples in the Lenthary Trade Corps," he murmured, tracing one shifting route with a gloved hand. "They're stalling outgoing shipments, no declarations yet." "They won't," Dax replied, eyes locked forward. "Not openly. They'll bleed Jorvain quietly." The bunker lights shifted subtly, dropping a degree cooler. The atmosphere thickened with the sense of movement, of ancient gears long stagnant grinding awake. Dorn Salvik leaned over his station, adjusting feeds. His movements were sharp, efficient, the scent of worn leather rising from his gloves as he manipulated the physical switches, rather than trusting voice commands. "Velrin Suver's Trade Confederacy has pulled diplomatic access codes from Jorvain fleets," Dorn said, disbelief thinly veiled behind discipline. "They won't even be able to dock without authorization." A beat passed. "They'll notice," Malric warned. "They're supposed to," Orin said. Outside the bunker, another tremor shook dust loose from overhead vents. The ground shifted under the dead weight of cities falling to ash. Humanity's oceans boiled where orbital rounds had punched through, sending vapor plumes high into the bruised skies. Dax stayed fixed on the plasma screens. Systems flared softly in gold and blue, symbols of old debts, now demanded. "Cue the secondary contacts," he ordered. "They'll play their part whether they know it or not." Orin's hands moved swiftly. Across the heads-up maps, supply lines began to choke. Starports flagged irregularities. Mineral shipments turned back at customs stations. From a distance, it would seem like coincidence, bad timing, legal hiccups. But the Jorvain's power structure would feel it. slowly at first, like a fever in the blood before it rotted the bones. Jaren's voice broke the silence. We have anomalies in the Helvern circuit, Jorvain transports rerouting. Dax's gaze sharpened. Let them run. The noose isn't meant to catch the throat, it's meant to tighten slowly enough. They think they can still breathe. The display room grew colder, the walls pulsing faintly with the hidden energy of a species making war with ideas, not missiles. Orin tapped a sequence. A file unsealed itself on the center console, old ink signatures scrolling across the screen, the thin slashes of quills used in dusty diplomatic chambers, where treaties had been written long before any of them had been born. This is our answer, Orin said, almost to himself. Dax glanced at him sidelong. His expression remained unreadable, but there was a sliver of something behind it. Not pride, not hope, but a recognition that they were stepping onto the final path Earth had prepared, and no one could walk it back. Outside, the broken planet spun on, its surface lacerated, its people silent. A distant rumble shivered through the bunker, heavier than the last. Dax tilted his head slightly, listening, not to the Earth breaking apart above them, but to the sound of Jorvain's arrogance beginning to crumble under the weight of ancient oaths and long-forgotten debts. Begin selective leak protocols, Dax said, voice low. Jaren keyed in the command, the motion crisp. Across the galaxy, quiet whispers would start, stories of Jorvain crimes, of atrocities hidden, of corruption woven through the Empire's gilded halls. And the evidence? Dorn asked. Jaren smiled thinly. All authenticated, all timed, all waiting. The screens flickered again, this time showing minor colonies. The fringe worlds Earth had spent decades infiltrating with nothing but clean water projects, satellite beacons, agricultural support, investments no one had paid attention to, investments that would now bloom into leverage. We won't have open rebellion yet, Malric said, shifting his stance. No, Dax agreed, but we'll plant doubt deep enough that when the walls start cracking, they'll tear them down themselves. The air in the bunker tightened, coiled, ready. He looked once more across the plasma-lit room, at the faces drawn into grim focus. These were not soldiers in the traditional sense. No armor gleamed, no banners fluttered, only minds honed sharp as razors, willing to bury an empire with the quietest of knives. One move at a time, Dax said. No second chances. The first Alliance withdrawal notice arrived, a flicker on the peripheral screen, almost unremarkable in the flood of alerts. But Dax watched it closely, the corner of his mouth curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. The first piece had moved, and the Jorvain Empire had not yet realized it was already losing. Feed the fire carefully, Jaren Vorsk muttered. Eyes narrow under the blue wash of the laser plasma display. Too much at once, and they'll smell the trap. The command bunker's lights dimmed to tactical blue, sharpening every movement into silhouettes. Dax Verone said nothing. His gaze stayed fixed on the thin ribbon of code crawling across the terminal, an untraceable data leak primed for release. Earth's counterstrike would not roar like Jorvain railguns. It would whisper, then devour. Ready the first drop, Dax instructed, voice smooth as a scalpel drawn against stone. Jaren's gloved fingers danced across the controls, tapping in final sequences. Across the galaxy, hidden relays embedded in forgotten colonies blinked alive, poised to scatter classified files where the Jorvain Empire least expected. The room smelled faintly of heated circuitry and cold dust, the scent of old machines waking from hibernation. Dax's lungs filled with the dry air, every breath a reminder of the careful machinery now grinding forward. Transmission seated, Jaren confirmed. His voice was soft, controlled, as if afraid even sound could betray them. The screen shifted. A heads-up map bloomed outward, each node representing a different Jorvain military outpost. Within moments, secure internal channels, supposedly firewalled against intrusion, flickered and pulsed red. Dax leaned closer, his shadow cutting across the feed. Open the first thread. A coded file unfurled like a blooming stain. Images filled the screens. Jorvain soldiers raising civilian colonies. Secret executions. Extortions signed under Imperial command seals. None of it fabricated. Every file was real, painstakingly gathered over decades by Earth's silent watchers. They'll deny it first, Dorn Salvek said, standing stiff-backed at his console. Then they'll accuse each other. Exactly, Jaren said, keying the final encryption lock. Their paranoia is our sharpest knife. The first node crackled, then another. Laser plasma displays across the room rippled with corrupted signals, growing like a virus inside the Jorvain network. Somewhere light-years away, commanders scrambled to purge the information. Too late, the seeds had been sown. In Jorvain's high command chambers aboard the dreadship Vorvax, Admiral Rulf Drenek barked orders, unaware that his private comms were hemorrhaging into the public net. The heady scent of scorched coolant filled his bridge as systems jammed. Crewmen's faces twisted in confusion, hands flying over crimson-lit consoles as corrupted files flooded their internal servers. Inside Earth's bunker, Jaren watched it unfold. His smile never reached his eyes. "Now we wait," he said. Dax folded his arms behind his back, his boots steady on the grated floor. He knew better than to anticipate visible chaos yet. The first cracks formed deep below the surface, invisible to those treading it. Malric Dorn shifted from his post near the entrance, the rustle of his uniform brushing the tense air. How long before it spreads? Jaren's fingers tapped the console once, twice. With luck, hours. Without it, minutes. The air thickened with unspoken tension. The temperature inside the bunker dropped slightly as environmental systems kicked higher, filtering out particulates stirred up by subterranean vibrations. Dust tasted dry on the tongue, like old parchment being torn apart. Across the galaxy, encrypted Jorvain councils lit up in frantic, overlapping bursts. Some tried to dismiss the leaks as enemy propaganda. Others demanded internal inquiries. Accusations bred faster than their explanations. Laser plasma feeds showed intercepted communications, clipped orders, shouted denials, frantic realignments of security protocols that only widened the gaps. "They're unraveling," Dorn said, voice dry. Dax watched a small green node blink yellow, then red. One of the Jorvain's Admiralty fleets had gone dark, communications severed by internal lockdowns. "One tooth lost," Dax said quietly. "More will follow." A sharp scent of overworked electronics grew stronger as the data relays strained under the avalanche of cross-traffic. Jaren's hands never left the console, fine tremors betraying the sheer complexity of the coordination. "Time for a nudge," Oren Fassel asked from across the room. Dax nodded once. Jaren cued a secondary leak, targeting regional governors, names, dates, proof of extortion hidden under the Empire's gilded facade. The files slipped into minor colony networks, like whispers shared between frightened children. On the laser displays, unrest blinked to life across 3 outer sectors. Civilian protests erupted where obedience had once reigned. Some were crushed violently, others sparked wider rebellion. "They're punching shadows," Jaren said, satisfaction coiled tight behind his words. A warning tone chimed from Malric's station. Dorn pivoted quickly. High command flare detected, encrypted military override codes engaged. They're hunting saboteurs inside their own fleets. Dax allowed himself a brief breath through his nose, the air sharp and cool. The Empire was doing exactly what he needed, tearing its own foundation apart in search of ghosts that didn't exist. "We haven't fired a single shot," Oren remarked, half in wonder, half in grim pride. Dax didn't smile. Not every war needs fire. Some wars end when the enemy no longer trusts the man standing next to him. The bunker trembled lightly, an aftershock from a distant orbital strike. It barely registered among the sharper tremors already running through the Jorvain chain of command. Another red pulse spread across the feed. Internal arrests, purges, fleet realignments where none were needed. "They're eating themselves alive," Dorn said, almost reverently. Jaren keyed the final operation for the cycle, tilting his head slightly. Permission to drop the second wave. Dax stepped forward, the faint scent of cold steel bleeding from the laser console grips. His fingers hovered a breath above the command plate. "Send it." A whisper of pressure settled into the room as the second wave launched. Names, numbers, evidence that mid-level fleet captains had siphoned resources, doctored battle reports, betrayed superiors. Every piece of dirt Earth had swept together now tumbled loose in an unstoppable cascade. Across the stars, The Jorvain Empire bled trust faster than it bled soldiers. For the first time in centuries, their iron command structure creaked under the invisible weight of suspicion. Dax watched the final cascade bloom across the displays, a cold, beautiful collapse unfolding one accusation at a time. In the quiet that followed, he spoke low enough that only the men closest could hear. This is how empires fall. No cheers rose, no applause echoed. Just the steady rhythm of an enemy empire turning to dust beneath its own pride. "Open the channel," Orin Fassel said, his voice sliding across the room like drawn steel. The bunker air prickled as Vin Korlak keyed the heads-up array, the laser plasma display fracturing into a dozen sector maps. Each world blinked under Jorvain banners. Territories strained by distance, neglected by the throne. Easy targets, if pushed the right way. The stale scent of worn plastics and filtered air clung to the command center. No one spoke above a whisper. The walls themselves seemed to listen. "Targets selected," Vin confirmed, scrolling through names. "Border systems, minor, restless, overlooked." Orin nodded once, his outline sharp under the cold illumination. "Then we begin." On screen, the world of Vartran 6 flickered into view, its faded crest a cracked disk, barely holding together. A figure answered the incoming line, a weary administrator wrapped in ceremonial robes that looked 2 sizes too large for his gaunt frame. "You understand what you're risking," Orin said without preamble. "Stay tethered to Jorvain, and you'll sink with them." The administrator's image shifted uneasily, the flicker of distant fires reflecting in his glassy eyes. Around him, background noise suggested civil unrest, shouts, crashing debris, the low pulse of defiance. "And if we defect?" the administrator asked, voice brittle. "You gain protection," Vin said, folding his hands behind his back. "Resources. Access to reconstruction fleets. No public announcement needed, only a withdrawal of loyalty, staged cleanly." The administrator hesitated. His fingers twitched against the edge of his console, the smell of singed wiring hanging in the air behind him like a bad omen. "Decide quickly," Orin added. "Events are already moving. Hesitation will make you a target either way." The screen went dark without a reply. Vin glanced at Orin. "That's one." "We don't need all of them," Orin murmured. "Just enough to tear the seams." Another call connected, this time the Leadership Council of Edron's Reach, a planet famous for its mining colonies, and infamous for the cruelty of Jorvain tax collectors. "You're choking," Vin said smoothly, no malice in his tone. "We'll cut the chain if you choose the right side." The Edron governor shifted in his seat, sweat beading at his temple. He recognized leverage when he saw it, and desperation had long since eaten his pride. In the background, the low rumble of a reactor threatened collapse, vibrating through the screen. Edron's mines, vital for Jorvain's shipbuilding, were teetering toward sabotage by their own desperate workers. "You'll have our loyalty," the governor rasped, the words tasting like ash. "Withdraw formally within the next cycle," Vin said. "We'll handle the rest." The laser plasma display updated in real time. Edron's world shifted to a muted gray, neither empire aligned nor openly rebelled. A vacuum ready to be filled. Dax Veron entered the chamber, his footsteps soundless over the reinforced deck. He studied the updated maps, his expression carved from stone. "Progress?" he asked, not bothering to mask the expectation behind the question. "We've secured 2 major defections," Orin replied, several more leaning. Dax's gaze moved over the sector outlines, tracking supply routes like a hunter marking weak arteries on prey. The Jorvain Empire hadn't just relied on loyalty, they depended on obedience fed by fear. Strip away the fear, and their authority withered. "Push harder," Dax said. "Tear the edges before the center realizes." Vin keyed another connection, a minor fleet world, Korath Prime. Their commander appeared on screen, scarred, armor scratched raw from too many abandoned battles. "You can die forgotten under Jorvain's banner," Vin said quietly. "Or you can rise with the free sectors. Choose carefully." The commander didn't argue. Warriors understood when survival meant changing sides. A stiff nod answered the offer. The scent of old oil and scorched cloth, seeped into the command center as atmospheric filtration struggled to keep up. Every officer present tasted the shift, momentum, fragile, growing, inevitable. Dorn Salvek called from the side station. Jorvain reallocating fleets to cover border sectors. Spreading thin, a slow knowing smile tugged at Oren's mouth. Exactly where we want them. Each defection was a blade slipped beneath the Empire's armor, unseen until it cut. We have a problem, Melric Dorn announced. Jorvain has dispatched patrol ships toward Vartran 6. They suspect. They're reacting too soon, Dax said. His voice didn't rise. It sank deeper, anchoring the room. Desperation breeds mistakes. Oren shifted the map to highlight weak points. If they pull forces off the core sectors to chase loyalty at the fringes, we break them at home. Dax nodded. Trigger the decoy transmissions. Vin activated secondary protocols. Across the stars false signals bloomed. Faked rebellion reports. Manufactured uprisings designed to drag Jorvain forces in 20 wrong directions at once. On the heads-up displays, minor worlds turned their banners. Broken sigils, the Empire's proud emblems, split and fell, fracturing into neutral gray and rebellious crimson. The taste of dust thickened in the command center's recycled air, mixing with the sharper bite of heated circuits working overtime. No one moved without purpose. Every keystroke, every data burst, carried the weight of a blade slipping deeper into Jorvain's spine. Dorn spoke again, the edges of his words tight. Imperial Command has issued an emergency edict, full martial law in border sectors, no reinforcements to interior worlds. Dax leaned over the main console, studying the fraying map. He saw not battle lines, but arteries clogging with panic. Good, he said, now cut the heart. No celebrations, no boasts, only the cold satisfaction of seeing the plan unfold exactly as designed. Jaren Vorsk reappeared briefly on a side screen. The next phase, he asked. Dax straightened, his shadow spilling long across the floor. Open the path for the compact, he ordered. It's time to remind the galaxy that Earth is not the one losing. Outside the command center, Earth's broken horizon smoldered under dark skies. But inside, victory took form, not in battles won, but in loyalties turned and empires bleeding themselves dry. The real war was not of ships or armies. It was of minds, of wills broken not by force, but by the careful subtraction of hope. Initiate council summons, Dax Varen said, voice flat as iron striking marble. Inside the strategic bunker, the air tightened cool and dry against the skin. Above them, Earth's skies still burned, but here the real battle shifted to signatures and oaths. Vin Korlak stepped forward, adjusting his cuffs as he approached the main console. The laser plasma displays reshaped into sector diagrams, colored alliances blooming faintly against a dark backdrop. On the largest screen, the Galactic Council's chamber filled with hollow echoes as envoys gathered, their movements deliberate under cold banners. The scent of sterilized polymers and old stone seeped from the filtration systems, a reminder of the ancient bureaucracy about to be weaponized. Grand Compact channels open, Dorn Salvek confirmed from his post, his tone clipped. Vin leaned in, his reflection cutting sharply across the polished surface. Prepare the compact documents. No edits, he ordered. They sign what we give them, or they stand alone. Oren Fassel tapped in authorization codes. One by one, treaty files unsealed, decades of silent diplomacy, stitched into a noose around the Jorvain Empire's throat. The connection stabilized. Hastur Vane, the Norvaxian arbiter, appeared on screen, a figure cloaked in flowing silks, his long features impassive. Around him, council members from scattered species took their seats, each moving like weighted pendulums pulled toward inevitable judgment. The chamber carried a strange gravity, as if the very air resisted movement. Earth petitions recognition of Compact 71A, Vin began, his voice steady, threaded with restrained authority. Vane raised a hand, forestalling interruption. You come before us in smoke and ash, he said, the old ceremonial opening heavy in the stillness. Speak, Vin let a beat pass, the silence hanging thick before replying. Earth moves not for conquest, he said, but for the isolation of criminal aggression. Documents flowed onto the council's individual heads-up panels, soft blue flickers lighting the heavy stone desks. Each treaty clause cut lean and brutal, offering no shelter to those allied with Jorvain. Councilors whispered among themselves, the low murmur brushing against the chamber walls like dry leaves in a dead season. Vin watched without blinking. "They'll hesitate," Orin said under his breath, voice reaching only Dax's ears. "They can afford to hesitate," Dax murmured back. "Jorvain can't." The first councilor signed, an envoy from the Delvani clusters, their tendrilled fingers scrawling a looping signature across the display. A second followed, then a third. One by one, the compact gathered weight. Vane's expression tightened fractionally, the only crack in his otherwise unreadable veneer. "The Empire holds obligations here," Vane said, a careful hand resting against the ancient council gavel. "To disregard them is to disregard the slaughter of innocents." Vin finished smoothly. "We present proof, sealed and verified." At a side console, Jaren Vorsk executed the evidence burst. Each councilor's heads-up screen lit briefly, showing select brutal glimpses: planetary sieges, falsified treaties, colonies turned to ash under Jorvain banners. The taste of old stone and colder truths filled the council chamber, seeping into the air like slow poison. Vane's hand lifted, then fell. "The evidence stands," he intoned. The finality of it cracked the tension like a dropped blade. Outside Earth's bunker, winds tore across blasted plains, lifting soot into spiraling eddies. Inside, the strategic team watched the legal chains tighten around their enemies. Compact 71A ratified by simple majority, announced the Delvani envoy. Vin bowed his head slightly, a gesture as sharp and final as a closed book. "Enforcement protocols initiated," Dorn said, eyes locked on the updates streaming in. "Trade routes sealed, supply lines severed, diplomatic channels cut without ceremony." Haster Vane hesitated only a heartbeat before sealing the ruling with his insignia, a dark mark against Jorvain's ambitions. "Effective immediately," Vane declared. "Jorvain holdings are stripped of council protections. Neutrality barriers engaged." The council chamber's dim lighting seemed to press down harder, pinning the Empire under its own failed grandeur. Laser plasma displays at Earth's command center bloomed with the first flashes of effect, starports denying entry, cargo manifests shredded mid-transport, border authorities locking down transit lanes. "They're locked out," Malric Dorn confirmed, a rare edge of satisfaction in his usually dry voice. Dax stepped back from the main console, allowing the moment to settle. His face betrayed no triumph, only the measured satisfaction of inevitability realized. "Prepare secondary isolation layers," he instructed. "If they squirm, tighten the net." On the council screens, Jorvain representatives shouted protests, their demands hollow against the flood of signatures binding them in legal quarantine. "Their voices grow smaller by the minute," Orin observed, his tone detached. The compact, once a theoretical weapon, now coiled around the Jorvain Empire with quiet ruthlessness. The once feared war machine was now little more than a quarantined relic, thrashing in a web spun before it ever drew its first sword. "Earth has no further motions," Vin said, bowing out with calculated grace. The screen cut to black, the sudden loss of connection leaving a taste of cold finality in the air. Dorn leaned back, exhaling slowly through his nose. "Without trade, they'll suffocate before they ever reload another cannon." Jaren closed the diplomatic channels, hands lingering for a moment above the shutdown controls. "It's almost merciful," he said under his breath. Dax didn't reply. Mercy hadn't been the goal, survival had. Outside, twilight stained the sky a bruised purple. No celebrations erupted, no victories declared, only the cold, heavy weight of one empire crumbling into silence, while another, quieter one, watched from the shadows. "Phase 3 is ready," Orin said, stepping forward. Dax nodded once. "Good," he said. "Let's see how long they can breathe without a sky." "Trigger the flood," Dax Veron said, voice steady as stone. Inside the command bunker, the air grew colder, drier, charged with the sense of something irreversible about to unfold. Tarn Helvik stood at the primary console, his gloved hand hovering over the activation plate. Around him, the laser plasma displays mapped the galactic trade routes like veins ready to clot. The smell of heated circuitry filled the room, sharp and faintly bitter. Project Overture standing by. Tarn confirmed, his voice stripped of ceremony. One touch. Centuries of silent preparation would ignite. He pressed down. In an instant, across 900 independent worlds, dormant treaty clauses flared to life. Agreements penned in quiet negotiations, buried in trade laws, folded into shipping rights, all of them now snapped shut like iron traps. On the displays, sectors blinked from neutral to sealed. Supply lines collapsed inward. Docking bays closed. Orbital gates shut off without warning, locking Zorvane fleets out of critical ports. The first world to activate was Drellis Minor. Their docking clamps froze mid-transfer, trapping Zorvane cargo freighters half-emptied. Control tower feeds erupted in red error signals. Crews shouted across dead comms, their commands bouncing back into static. Seconds later, Keldron's trade nexus followed. Warehouse seals slammed down. Grain shipments and refined alloys, once bound for Zorvane factories, now sat useless under force field locks. Tarn's hands moved methodically across the heads-up display, triggering layer after layer of the Overture network. Outer colonies have confirmed enforcement, Dorn Selvik called from his console. His face remained still, but tension vibrated under the skin. The bunker walls seemed to press inward, heavy with the magnitude of what they had unleashed. Dust settled gently from the ceiling vents, the only movement besides the flashing lights. Oren Fassel stepped closer to the main board. No early resistance, Tarn shook his head. None that matters. They know the terms. They bound themselves willingly. Fear kept them obedient until now. Outside in orbit, civilian traffic halted. Merchant convoys once serving as the arteries of galactic commerce floated helpless, unable to dock, unable to resupply. Inside the Zorvane Fleet Command, chaos erupted. Officers barked into dead channels. Quartermasters stared in disbelief at cargo manifests that no longer existed. Primary fleets are grounding themselves, Jaren Vorse said, his eyes flicking between heads-up screens. Fuel shortages inside 2 cycles, munitions reserves will evaporate within the week. The taste of recycled air grew sharper, dry on the tongue. Dax inhaled slowly, measuring the momentum building with every shuttered port. Another pulse of information lit the command center. A dozen more planets had enforced their clauses, each one another lock clicking shut. We have a soft breach at Servath, Dorn said. Zorvane envoy tried threatening local governors. Tarn keyed a secondary protocol. A sealed message flashed through the system. Old promises of protection from Earth, quietly offered years before. Servath folded without further argument, slamming its gates closed and refusing all Imperial traffic. Across the stars, Zorvane's supply ships turned back from empty ports. Fleets abandoned escort positions to search for resources. Military depots ran dry, unable to resupply forward bases. The Zorvane Empire had built itself on endless consumption. Now, it found the galaxy's cupboards bare. Grand Compact enforcement confirmed, Ven Korlak said, reading the incoming approvals from neutral factions. Hastervane's seal had done more than freeze assets. It had signaled to every hesitant governor that Zorvane was no longer the future, but the past. One by one, dominions fell away, pulling their resources inward, sealing their docks, refusing the Empire's desperate pleas. Visual confirmation on primary fleet grounds, Dorn announced. 37 carriers, 57 dreadnoughts stranded across 6 sectors. The smell of old dust thickened, stirred up by unseen vents. The room grew hotter as the sheer volume of redirected transmissions hammered the internal systems. Tarn wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve, eyes never leaving the shifting maps. Dax stepped beside him, watching. How long before they realize there's no way out? Dax asked. Tarn considered for a moment. They already know, they just haven't accepted it yet. Another fleet, this one stationed at Helverin Junction, broke formation, abandoned by its own supply convoys. The Empire's once proud banners flickered into gray static on the screens. Sir, Malric said, voice low, reports of mutinies inside 2 detached fleets. Crews demanding withdrawal to home systems. Dax nodded once. Slow, let them run, he said. Wherever they go they'll find the same closed doors. Across the heads-up displays, the final treaties activated. A cascade of locks, supply depots sealed, manufacturing hubs powered down, civilian transports embargoed. No shots fired, no soldiers landed, only empty hunger tightening its grip, squeezing the Empire's life between closed fingers. Outside the bunker, a cold rain began to fall, rinsing ash from the broken earth. Each drop tapped against the battered surfaces like a slow, steady drumbeat. Inside, the men of Earth stood quietly as the galaxy shifted. Jaren adjusted one of the side feeds, intercepted Jorvain transmission, orders to initiate emergency resource raids. Desperation, Orin muttered. They'll tear themselves apart before they reach anything worth stealing, Dax said. On the primary feed, Jorvain territories pulsed red. Trade guilds abandoned them openly now. Neutral sectors denied them passage. Allies that once cowered now closed their gates. Laser plasma screens captured the slow disintegration, abandoned cargo freighters adrift, docking stations iced in silent refusal, worlds that turned their faces away, as the Empire begged for what it once demanded. Status report, Dax said, his voice filling the room like distant thunder. Tarn straightened, Project Overture fully engaged, no further moves needed. The galaxy is closed. Outside the rain thickened, dragging the last ashes into the dirt. Inside the last locks fell into place with a quiet, terrible finality. The Jorvain Empire, so sure of its dominance, was no longer dying by war. It was starving in the cold silence of doors shut in its face, and Earth hadn't needed to lift a single gun to make it happen. Let it fracture, Dax Veron said, coldly watching the Empire splinter. Inside Earth's command bunker, the laser plasma displays spilled a flood of chaotic feeds, riots, mutinies, warships firing on their own flagships. The room tasted of cold dust and electric tension, thick on the tongue. Tarn Helvix brought up a stream from the outer sectors, his hands moving with clinical speed, each sector lit in varying shades of red, conflict zones bleeding into rebellion. They're breaking faster than projections, Orin Fassel murmured, studying the flickering streams. On the central panel, Quen Dravik's broadcast seized every open channel. Once a governor under Jorvain rule, now the voice of 1,000 defiant worlds, his face gaunt and lined with fire, stared from the displays as he spoke. We are not the Empire's cattle, Dravik declared, his voice rasping like iron dragged across stone. We are not their coin. We are the end of their reign. The words ignited fires across a dozen systems. Planetary archives burned. Great towers bearing the Jorvain sigil toppled as mobs stormed through city streets. The air in the council districts filled with the sharp tang of scorched fabric and broken stone. Vin Corlock tracked fleet movements, lines etched sharply across his screens. They're trying to rally at Central Command, he said, fingers tapping sharply. But without supplies, without loyalty, he didn't finish. The outcome already flooded the screens. One Jorvain dreadnought fired on another over Severin's belt, an act unthinkable, a mere month before. Debris fanned out in slow arcs, glittering against dying suns. Inside the command bunker, the stale recycled air smelled faintly of worn leather and cold electronics. Every breath tasted like old ash. They're tearing themselves apart, Malric Dorn said from his station, voice steady. Dax stepped closer to the tactical feed. His boots thudded softly against the steel plating. On the heads-up displays, council halls filled with smoke, soldiers abandoned posts, governors issued contradictory orders before being dragged from their seats. A communication intercepted, admirals screaming for reinforcements, fleets refusing to respond. Their command structure is eating itself, Jaren Vorsk said. He zoomed into a live feed from Arvok's 3rd Garrison, where loyalist and rebel troops clashed in savage hand-to-hand combat. The world outside Earth's bunker remained still, the rain washing away ash from the soil. Inside, the collapse of an empire played out in jagged frames. Quen Dravik's forces have seized 6 colonial hubs, Dorn Salvik reported. 2 more fallen without resistance. Show me Krosvan sector, Dax said. Tarn pulled up the feed. Flames poured from the council towers of Krosvan's capital. The banners once flying imperial blue were reduced to torn rags whipping in dirty wind. The ground forces, wearing hastily spray-painted sigils of rebellion, marched past smoldering archives. The scent of burning parchment and scorched polymers leaked through the filtered visuals. A Jorvain official, once a symbol of unassailable control, was paraded through the streets. His robes were torn, and the symbols of his rank dragged in the dirt behind him. "They're dismantling history," Oren said quietly. "No," Dax corrected. "They're dismantling chains." On the side panels, intercepted Jorvain internal reports showed entire regions abandoning imperial law, setting up provisional councils, or plunging into chaos. "They'll beg for outside support," Vin said. Dax nodded slightly. "And they'll find none." Jaren tuned into another feed. Planet Solvek's primary dry docks, massive structures spanning oceans, had sealed themselves. Imperial fleets, stranded and half-starved, drifted helplessly above. A riot exploded through the labor camps orbiting Relvac Station. Guards abandoned their posts. Prisoners overwhelmed barracks. The low vibration of detonations rattled the laser plasma feeds. "They've lost all outer sectors," Dorn announced. "Transmission breakdowns across the core worlds." In a corner feed, the once mighty Jorvain Imperial Palace, a fortress built to outlast civilizations, shuddered under artillery fire from its own defense batteries turned inward by defectors. Stone cracked. Statues of former emperors toppled like broken idols. The heavy taste of concrete dust filled the visual overlays. "They're drowning themselves," Oren said, watching the internal collapse snowball. Another heads-up feed caught an Imperial fleet in full retreat, gunning down civilian vessels attempting to flee ahead of them. The desperation was ugly, crude, inevitable. "Their empire was always a lie," Dax said, his voice low. "It just needed the right truth to tear it open." Quen Dravik's latest transmission echoed across the feeds. No banners, no grandeur, just raw, unflinching words. "To the free worlds, cut deeper. To the chained, break yourselves." Planet after planet, star system after star system, the tide rolled on. What Earth had begun with signatures and whispers now erupted in fire and blood. Inside the bunker, the last air cycle shifted. The smell of charged dust gave way to a cleaner, sharper scent, the atmosphere of finality. Tarn straightened, closing down redundant feeds. "They're past the tipping point." Dax stepped back, the reflection of burning worlds mirrored in the display's hard blue light. "Monitor for retaliatory flares," he ordered. "No intervention unless absolutely necessary." "They're too busy gutting each other," Jaren said. Outside, the first stars pierced the thick cloud cover, their light clean and cold against Earth's battered face. Inside, Dax Varen watched the end of an empire, not with cheers, not with victory parades, but with the silent certainty that the galaxy would remember exactly how it fell, not to weapons, to the quiet unraveling of its own greed. "Execute the freeze," Dax Varen ordered, voice smooth as a scalpel finding its mark. The laser plasma displays in Earth's command center blinked, reshaping into grids of asset networks, banking routes, and fleet funding pipelines. The bunker air grew thinner, as if the room itself held its breath for what came next. Haster Vane, seated at the center of the Galactic Council chamber, raised the Arbiter's seal. His robes shifted softly, brushing the marble floor as he stood before the assembly. The smell of cold stone and aged parchment filled the hall, ancient and final. "By the authority vested in the Grand Compact," Vane intoned, "Jorvain financial and military assets are frozen effective immediately." His voice struck like a hammer on steel. Around him, counselors moved with deliberate economy, transmitting authorization codes through secure channels. Heads-up displays embedded in the council walls pulsed amber, each flash a lock sliding into place across galactic banking networks. On Earth's displays, the first ripples appeared. Jorvain military payrolls vanished into frozen accounts. Fleet maintenance orders blacked out mid-processing. Fuel allotments reverted to system control without warning. Dorn Salvek tracked the collapse in real time, his fingertips drumming once against the console. Primary military accounts sealed across all sectors. Officers reporting funding anomalies. Tarn Helvix brought up footage from Jorvain command ships. Screens aboard dreadnoughts turned cold blue, account access denied, orders stranded mid-transmission. Crew members slammed fists into dead terminals, their faces pale under flickering emergency lights. In the Great Council Hall, Vane pressed the final command. The Arbiter's seal burned briefly against the activation plate, a deep red mark branding the end of Jorvain's reign. Back on Earth, a sharp scent of warmed composites drifted from the relay stations under strain, mixing with the stale bunker air. Every breath tasted sharper, cleaner, victory carved through legality, not fire. Secondary assets collapsing, Jaren Vorsk reported. His voice carried an edge of disbelief. They can't fund repairs, fleet movements, or even basic rations. Tarn adjusted the feed. Across Jorvain-controlled worlds, military consulates shut down. Frozen financial holoscreens hung in the air like empty coffins, their surface scrolling endless denials. In the core sectors, unrest deepened. Without pay, soldiers abandoned posts. Officers, stripped of resources, bartered stolen supplies for safe passage. The once mighty empire collapsed inward, too starved to sustain its own weight. Fleet commanders demanding loyalty oaths to local governors, Vin Korlak said, scanning intercepted transmissions. Desertions accelerating. On Earth's laser plasma panels, the map of Jorvain holdings rotted visibly, borders dissolving into chaotic gray. Entire sectors vanished from Imperial control without a single battle fought. Relvac Banking Consortium has withdrawn all Imperial credit, Dorn added. Commercial fleets impounded. A secondary screen lit with footage from a major Jorvain trade station. Cargo bays, once bustling with activity, stood silent. Automated loaders sat frozen mid-motion, their systems dead from cut funding. "Show me Helvran's spire," Dax said. Tarn flicked the feed. Helvran, the financial jewel of the Empire, was a ruin. The great spire towers, once symbols of invincibility, flickered in darkness. Power grids failed. Security drones slumped lifeless against cold bulkheads. The ambient hum of Earth's bunker vibrated softly underfoot, a contrast to the silence bleeding through Jorvain's shattered cities. "Jorvain High Command attempting emergency summits," Jaren said, half smiling. No one's answering. Outside, the rain had faded, leaving the battered Earth gleaming under a bruised sky. Inside, Earth's leaders witnessed the surgical severance of an empire from its lifeblood. "Incoming transmission," Dorn announced. The bunker lights dimmed slightly as the secured line opened. Haster Vane's face appeared, framed against the heavy drapes of the council chamber. "The freeze order is irreversible," Vane said. His tone was stripped of politics, stripped of mercy. "Jorvain's charter rights are nullified. No appeals." Dax dipped his head slightly. "A salute, nothing more." "Understood," Dax replied. "Earth has no further motions." Vane inclined his head in return, the old weighty gestures of galactic law heavy between them. Then the line severed, leaving only the cold certainty of victory. Jaren leaned back in his chair, stretching stiff shoulders. The recycled air of the bunker now carried a cleaner scent, tinged with the faint ozone crackle of exhausted systems cooling. "No fleets," Vane said. "No funds, no food, no future." Orin finished. On the screens, the last images of Jorvain's power faded, warships abandoned, council chambers looted, military academies stripped bare. Across the galaxy, silence replaced orders, hunger replaced ambition, dust replaced banners. Inside Earth's command center, the final steps fell into place. Tarn pulled the primary board into focus. The Empire's sectors shimmered, drained of color. Once proud strongholds were nothing but gray ghosts drifting in empty space. "The galaxy watches," Dorn said, a rare note of awe threading through his voice. "And they understand," Dax said, quiet and sure. "This is what happens when you mistake patience for weakness." The storm outside receded, leaving clean skies broken only by the scars of what had come before. In the bunker, there were no cheers, no shouts of triumph, only the sound of slow, steady breathing, and the distant whisper of an empire being buried without a single shot fired. Earth had spoken, the galaxy had listened, and the empire had fallen. "Let it end in silence," Dax Veron said, his voice barely above a whisper. Inside Earth's command center, the laser plasma displays dimmed to a muted blue. No enemy fleets remained on the tactical maps. No alerts sounded, only empty, silent grids stretched across the panels, broken occasionally by the slow flicker of abandoned territories. Outside, the battered Earth steamed under the first clean rain it had tasted in weeks. Water pooled in broken streets, washing the ash of war into forgotten gutters. Dax stood still, listening not to any signal, but to the absence of conflict, a sound deeper than any shout of victory. Tarn Helvix folded his arms, watching the last of the Jorvain transmissions fall silent. On one feed, a A crumbling palace surrendered without resistance, its once proud banners trodden into mud. In another, a governor's mansion burned unchecked, the embers painting the horizon a deep, unforgiving red. Councils reconvened, Dorn Salvik said from his post. First motion on docket, acknowledgement of Earth's stabilization of the crisis. The words felt thin compared to the magnitude of what had been achieved. No parades, no declarations, just history tilting, almost imperceptibly, on a single decision. Project Final Marker, Dax ordered. Tarn keyed the command. On the central display, the Earth flag rose against a field of broken stars. Simple, undemanding, no fleets arrayed around it, no demands issued, just the quiet assertion of presence. In the council chamber, Hastur Vane rose from his seat. His robes, once flowing with grandeur, now looked heavy under the weight of history. The council recognizes Earth, he said, his voice cutting the silence with a clean final stroke. No tribute demanded, no sanctions imposed, authority restored by action, not aggression. No one objected. Across the stars, scattered leaders bowed heads, not in submission, but in understanding. The galaxy had witnessed an empire crumble without Earth's guns firing once, and they would remember. Dax exhaled slowly, the filtered air cold against the back of his throat. The scent of stone and steel lingered, remnants of battles fought with paper and silence. Vin Korlak stepped closer, reading the incoming council motions. No reparations, no council hearings, full reinstatement of Earth's diplomatic rights. Jaren Vorsk leaned against the console, exhaustion etched into the tight set of his shoulders. They expected vengeance. Dax shook his head, watching the flag ripple in the laser projection. They'll remember restraint longer than they remember fire. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet soil and broken concrete. A lone bird, its feathers ragged, darted across the washed-out skyline. Life, finding a way without fanfare. Inside, Earth's command center fell into a rare stillness. No orders needed giving, no threats needed answering. Incoming galactic broadcast, Dorn announced, his voice softer now. The display shifted to a council-wide transmission. Leaders of minor worlds spoke first, their words weaving gratitude with caution. Former Zorvane vassals sent formal oaths of neutrality, some pledging alliance, others simply acknowledging the new balance. None spoke of rebellion, none spoke of vengeance, they spoke of Earth, measured, deliberate, unbreakable. Tarn turned away from the console, his hands falling to his sides. "It's done," he said. Dax nodded. Once, on the outer displays, the remnants of the Zorvane Empire drifted like ash on the solar winds. Some enclaves still smoldered, fighting shadows, others dissolved quietly into the stars, nameless and forgotten. Across Earth's ruined cities, people emerged from shelters. No martial banners greeted them, no armies occupied their streets, only the slow rebuilding, one breath, one stone at a time. "Transmit closure orders," Dax said. "No occupation forces, no territorial claims. We leave the ashes to history." Oren Fassel looked up sharply. "Some will see it as weakness." Dax met his gaze without flinching. "Let them." Vin smiled faintly, the corner of his mouth tugging up. "The strong don't need to roar." The command center began shutting down systems one by one. Laser plasma displays faded to black. Status boards cleared. Final records sealed themselves into deep vaults, buried not in pride, but in necessity. Outside, the rain deepened, drumming softly against the ruined concrete. It washed away blood, dust, the shattered ambitions of empires who had once thought themselves eternal. Inside, Dax Varen watched the last feeds flicker out. "No ceremonies," he said quietly. "No speeches." Jaren chuckled low under his breath. "They'll write enough songs without us helping." The men in the bunker exchanged no handshakes. No medals changed hands, only glances, sharp, tired, understanding. Oren tapped the final closure code into the console. "Galactic records updated," he said. "Earth's seat restored." Dax looked at the blank screens one last time. "No wars fought," he murmured. "Only wars ended." Behind him, the Earth flag hung still in the air, projected against nothing but empty sky. The council chambers faded into quiet deliberations. Old alliances shifted, new ones formed. Across the galaxy, the lesson burned into memory. Humanity was not to be underestimated. not because of ships or weapons, but because they understood patience better than rage, discipline better than dominance. And when Earth rose, it rose without asking permission. The storm had passed, but the echoes would ripple through generations yet unborn. Earth had stood alone, Earth had risen alone, and the galaxy would never look at them the same way again.